let's welcome Warren Hill, the president of Hill Realty, to answer some questions we have. Warren?
Hi, Annabelle.
Hey. So the first question I have for you is that, Norman Hill has been in resale and new construction for over 50 years, probably even longer, like 60 years. So what are the biggest differences between buying a resale and new construction?
Okay, you're right. We have been doing this more as a seller than a builder, I guess, for over 60 years. And I guess at one time we were heavily involved in selling land to builders and developers as well. So we were kind of all over completely involved in this business. Anyway, so the main differences, I guess, between resale and new, which is, I would say most of them are probably fairly obvious. But anyway, so obviously a resale home is going to be an older home, which just by definition means you're buying someone else's home, you're buying their decorating choices, you're dealing with their older appliances, you're dealing with their older furnaces. The house is likely going to require more maintenance, sort of things on that sort of vein, where when you buy a new home, you have your own choices of finishings. Everything in the house is going to be new. Any new technologies in construction or in electronics will be in the new house, as opposed to obviously the resale, unless it's been upgraded by the current owner, is unlikely to have. And probably one of the major differences would be the fact that a new home will have the carry-on warranty. So obviously, if you buy a resale home, as they always say, it's buyer beware. It really is, you're getting what you're getting, and you better check it out thoroughly before you buy. And not to say you shouldn't with a new home, it's just that the difference is you'll have, for instance, you have a warranty that'll cover everything for the first year, plumbing and electrical for the second 2 years, and then structural defects for 7 years. So while that's obviously not everything, it'll certainly provide a certain level of comfort for a buyer, that's all. And those are probably the main differences between the two. There's obviously others, like one of the other main ones would be, if you buy a resale home, then obviously you're, within 60 or 90 days, you need to put up all your money and or mortgage. If you buy a new condo, for the sake of argument, you're probably looking at least 3 years before that place is completed, so no mortgage, and you'll be putting up only a certain amount of deposit and nothing further really until closing. So you have a fairly long time to save. If you buy a resale, the reality is you do not.
Right. So then in the current market, with high interest rates and low inventory, which do you suggest buying, resale or new construction?
It's probably a similar answer to me. I would say, generally speaking, I would probably buy new, for the reasons that I mentioned already, in terms of, quite literally, it's new, and you have all the benefits that I already described. So one of the kind of points, I guess, is if you buy new, and if you were particularly thinking of investment, but even if you're just buying it to live in, right? So if I buy, let's say today, and let's just use Oak Park as an example, and I buy a condo for, say, $700,000, just to make it easy. And so over the next year and a half, let's say, you're going to be putting down a total of 15% deposits, but that's all you'll put down for 3+ years. So for instance, if you assume, which, as Robert kind of alluded to, it's a little always hard to say, is the market going up, going down? There's a zillion factors in that. But on the assumption that, say, over the next 3 years, the markets were to rise marginally, okay? For instance, if the markets rose 2.5% a year on average, I'm not saying that'll necessarily happen in 1 year or the other, and you say, let's say it's 3 years, then you'll go, okay, it's rising 2.5% a year. It's around 50,000 increase on your 700. Now, if you bought a new home and you put up $700,000 and you got 50, your rate of return really is the 2.5. It's nothing particular. If you buy new and you only put up 105,000, which is the 15% of the 700,000, then the reality is your return is about 45% or about 15% a year if it rises 2.5%. Now, obviously, conversely, if it goes down, obviously you won't make those monies, but equally, you'll still have more time to save. As an example, depending on the person, you could go, okay, I'm going to go move in with my parents and allow me to build up to pay in 3 years, as opposed to, let's be honest, in 60 or 90 days, your ability to save additional funds is going to be pretty impaired. So that's kind of where I see the differences.
Right. And I know like a lot of new construction projects that are selling right now offer great incentives and extended payment structures, including our newly launched condo project in Oakville Park. Is this always the case for new construction, or is unique in the current market? Why is that?
Okay, so typically incentives tend to come and go really based on the market. So let's say 3 years ago, the reality is probably very little incentives would be offered, other than, in what I would describe as more of a normal market, assuming there is such a thing anymore. There would always be a time of year, which is actually right now. So typically summer months in a regular market are slow. They just are. We don't typically sell a lot of houses in that period of time. So because Oak Park has just opened, as an example, well, they obviously want to get sales rolling at this moment in time, knowing full well this isn't the ideal time. So they're offering incentives, which in this instance are up to $50,000 on closing, which, of course, once the markets pick up, which is more traditional in the fall, likely as not, those incentives will disappear. So in terms of is it always going to be this way? No. Is it always this way? It isn't. Is it on right now? Yes. And I'm assuming there's probably some other builders that might be offering other incentives, not necessarily the same incentives.
Right. So then you've been through market ups and downs in the last 10 to 20 years. So what do you think about the current market, and will go?
Okay, so I'm gonna allude to some of the information that Robert was mentioning, because he's 100% right. And probably, as he mentioned, we have sort of two problems. We have too small a supply, and we have far too big a demand. Now, in prior years, going well back in time, the markets would tend up, but it would go down, might go down for a year or two. It would go up for maybe 3 or 4 years and go down. But if you take a long view, like over 10 years, over 20 years, there's absolutely no question the markets have tended up. But if you're thinking in terms of a very short-term investment, it's hard to play. It's like the stock market. They tend up, and they tend in the long term to go up. But do they go down? Yes, they do, and they can go down hard. It's been a long time, to be perfectly honest, since we've seen much of a correction in the real estate market. It used to be, quite literally, when like 30 or 40 years ago, we would see corrections, probably every 3 to 5 years, almost without exception. It's been a long time since we've seen any real corrections. We've had what I would describe as a couple of blips, one sort of just as COVID started. The other one I would say is as they finally raised the interest rates, particularly oddly the last quarter. But then again, it's like the market just keeps shaking this stuff off. And I would say that at least a fairly large reason for that is, one, there is by no means enough supply being built. For instance, the number of houses and condos we're building now is still far less than we used to build probably 8 or 10 years ago, even though there's a lot more population and there's a lot more immigration coming in. So while we don't have enough supply for sure, the current federal government is really bringing in record numbers of immigrants, which is good for our economy in a general way, but obviously is and will play havoc on our housing market, and is a big driver of why the prices are rising so dramatically. Just because you said you got so many people coming in. The other thing you have in this country is you have a lot of foreign students coming here. And I was reading some stuff, but about 30% of them stay, which of course just adds even more people to your immigration or to people looking for houses. And typically, obviously it's around 34, 35%, which tend to land in the GTA. Obviously, year to year, that can change. I think right this second, Calgary seems to be doing well, but again, no other city except possibly Vancouver ever sees the kind of immigration that we do. And anyway, so those things are obviously a huge bearing on what's happening in our market.
Mm-hmm.
And while I agree with Robert, I think the current provincial government is attempting to eliminate the red tape. They're attempting to vastly improve approvals. They're also trying to, allow more units in every house. But all of those things, none of them are going to happen overnight. No matter which one you point at, red tape doesn't vanish overnight. The levels of immigration are going nowhere except up, it appears. The people that want condos or houses or somewhere to live keep going up. And not only is it driving prices, typically it's driving the rentals on the site. So, to be perfectly honest, if you're asking me where do I think this is going, I think at least for the next while, it's going up. I don't think it's going to rise, let's be honest, 20 or 30% a year, which is, as unbelievable as this might sound, was easily the numbers we were doing. But I do think it's going to keep trending. It may cool out now for a month or two, but I don't think it's going to last.
Right. So then what do you think are the most important factors to consider when choosing a project? In other words, what make a project have potential increase on its value?
Okay, so this is going to sound like the same answer you always hear from real estate agents, but the number one still is location. Now, it depends, obviously, a lot of that is personal choice. Do I, for instance, wish to live in a giant mansion out in the countryside? Do I want to live in a condo in the heart of the city? Or do I have other thoughts? Like you've alluded to earlier, everybody is reading the papers these days, watching TV. I don't think anyone who does that can possibly not be noticing what's happening with safety and crime around the city. It's just, I'd be honest, I've never seen it like this, and I've been here a long time. So I would say at least one, and I would say a big factor today, is people are going to want to live somewhere where they feel safe, where they feel they can walk on the streets, they can hop on their buses or whatever and travel without fear. It's like, I've always, personally, when I travel, I don't deliberately go, I'm going to travel to a city that is extraordinarily out of sight with crime, because I think that's a great idea. And the same would happen if I'm buying a house. I'm not going to buy if I'm afraid. At least I don't think so. Anyway, so one of the things would be that. The other one that people, of course, always look at is, okay, if I buy here, am I close to shopping? Am I close to transit of various types? Do I have parks? Do I have schools where my children can go and hopefully get a quality education? All of things like that. And to be honest, like I said, we've been doing this a long time. I know the cities, not only Toronto itself, but I know the cities around Toronto. And for sure, Oakville has had a very good reputation for a long time. And I've never, at least myself, I haven't been hearing anything negative in terms of Oakville. So in terms of, if you're going to buy to live in particular, you're going to go, I want to live in a place that has these things. There's other places that probably have similar things, but I will say that the reputation here is very high. And anyway, so I think those things would really help, say, a project like Oak Park in terms of people wanting to be there. I guess one of the other things I would comment on is, like we mentioned earlier, the rents have gotten extremely high, but they've also gotten high everywhere. So the rents today, let's say in Oakville, are not dramatically lower than Toronto, where they were, I would say, 5 years ago. Today, not very much, but the price to buy, of course, is still quite a bit less. So, those are sort of factors that, at least to me, would argue in favor of the site.
Great. And most guests who are joining us today actually are interested in making investment in new construction. What kind of suggestions do you have for them in the current market?
Most of those would sort of go back to everything we've already spoken about. Sort of goes back to what I said about the rents, about the location. I know in this particular spot, Ballantry is in an area that they call the uptown core in Oakville.
Mm-hmm.
And that area actually has been deliberately developed to make sure that it has an extremely walkable area, meaning you have literally, you got Longo's, you got Loblaws, you got Walmart, you got Supercenter. Everything is in walking distance here. You have parks, you have schools. You're very close to the transit. You're very close to GO trains, GO buses. You got the 407, you got the 403, you got the QEW. Everything is extremely close. So there's a lot of upside to these sorts of areas, and they have a sophisticated highway system in here. It's easy to travel everywhere. So to me, that would have a bearing. I think in terms of investors, the fact that you can get the high rents, and I would say the area should be in high demand. If not as much today, it certainly will be if you sort of, go, okay, here's where the things are today. Here's what's happening in these various areas today. And now you extrapolate that forward. Things don't typically go from this area is getting out of control to going, hey, this area is fantastic. It tends to go the other way around. It just keeps getting worse unless some level of government starts to really do something.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think I already covered most of the questions I have. Do you have other suggestions or topics you would like to cover?
No, I don't think so. I think, to be honest, I enjoyed Robert's talk personally quite a bit because I felt it really nailed down what's happening in the sort of global and Canadian economy and why things are happening the way they are. I guess in terms of, things, just reiterating some of what he said that have to be done to, hopefully reasonably quickly turn things around would be, they're unlikely to curtail immigration, or they certainly don't appear to be that way. In which case, you've got to bring a lot more people into the trades. You've got to speed up the process, obviously, to approve land to develop. And if you're going to bring in immigrants, I would say you would attempt to bring in immigrants who are obviously already skilled trades. Part of the problem, I think, personally, is I'm not as convinced that all the trades themselves are looking to hire vast quantities of people because, they've been doing pretty good rising the costs because there's no options to the builders. So it's sometimes I feel like I'm not sure that they're on the same page as they ought to be, but I don't know what you do about that. Anyway, no, beyond that, I think it's pretty much what we've already discussed, Annabelle.
Great. Thank you very much, Warren. Your great insights to share. And also, Norman Hill is our listing brokerage of Oak Park. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our sales agent, Vince and Adam from Norman Hill, and their contact can be found on our website.